Buddy, I'm an addict. My name is Scott. So I just wanted to thank the committee and Nick specifically for asking me to speak. Not really where I want to be right now. I'm more comfortable in those chairs, but that ultimate authority, right? And everything's in its right place. So you got a good example of me trying to self-will some shit in between the break, right? I'm like, Troy, can I go first? We had it all worked out, and then Andrew gets up and he's like, Troy first. Motherfucker. Topics are topics. I figured out you just tell your story and you figure out how it relates, right? But I want to talk a little bit about my day. Same thing, like had kind of a hectic day. It was my son's last soccer game. He's 6. We had homecoming parade. I'm from Indiana, PA. So we had a homecoming parade that screwed up traffic and all of that. And like nothing was going my way because I didn't pray this morning. I didn't ask for some other type of guidance. I don't drink coffee. I had caffeine once early. I was up until like 11 o'clock trying to solve a work problem. We had a safety incident last night, trying to solve some problems that I really can't put my hands in and fix from 6 hours away. So hit the morning with caffeine. Then as any good addict, I double down on the way down here. So I've just been sitting here with my teeth chattering, my feet bouncing, whatever, but I love this conference. It's been a while since I've been here. The last time was back in Whitaker. I used to come with a dear friend of ours who unfortunately isn't able to make it to these anymore. And, that man, Rich, taught me a lot about humility and one ultimate authority. He was a great man. And, when I got in here and got one of the programs, the other one, in memory of Doug B, is just another dude that's cut from that same cloth. And I wanted to say, like a long time ago, I never thought I'd meet anybody else like Rich, but Doug was that same thing, man. He was that same type of man. And there's tons of them in Narcotics Anonymous, our friend Steven, who spoke earlier, I didn't have the same experience. When I walked into this room, I didn't feel the power. I felt anxiety. I feel less than. I feel like I don't belong. That's where my disease attacks me in the weakest moments, right? And then I start to look around the room and I see guys like Hank and Dale and Rich and all of these guys that, have showed me this works and have been here. Tim and, there's tons of them around the room that were here and were here for decades when I got here. And had figured this thing out and showed me that as a man, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep coming back, right? So also the other thing is, like, I'm a real spiritual person. I got all these like sacred, me and him almost have like the exact same wardrobe, outfit, tattoos, all that shit, but I started to like understand the longer I stay clean, like how my spirit affects how I become the man I'm supposed to be, and how like uncovering that spirit that I just layer drugs and trauma and hate and all of these things on top of. But anyway, I stopped for gas on the way down, phone in my car, just so I could let Nick know I was on my way in a rough time, and my destination, my time of arrival was 2:22. And we're on the 22nd anniversary, and it's about the second step in the second tradition. My home group is Restoration to Sanity. It's the second step meeting. There's no coincidences in this life that we live, right? And that spirit speaking to me, that's my higher power speaking to me, saying you're right where you need to be. You might not want to be there, but that's where you need to be, right? And I can say, like, I got clean. We're coming up on an anniversary. 10/24/12 is my clean date. So as long as Scott's willing, in a couple of weeks, we'll celebrate 12 years. And, our friend Lance and Jim and all these guys over here, Rich used to say something when somebody would say, God willing, I'll celebrate. And Rich would say, God's always willing, are you? So a couple months ago at Area, somebody was like, God willing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to carry this tradition on. And be like, God's always willing, or you. Rich, it sounded loving and caring. I sounded like a dickhead. I was like, wow, still got some work to do, right? So yeah, that's second step is where Narcotics Anonymous hit home for me, right? So I come into the South Hills because I used rehab like hush money and would get high until I couldn't get high anymore, $6, $7, $8 at a time, and then I would go to rehab. And then, I'd stay there for a week and I'd come out and my run would be 3 months. And I don't know these time frames. I know I stayed for a week the first time, but I know my rehab stays got longer and the runs in between got shorter until I exhausted all options. And I ended up in a treatment facility in the middle of the woods. I got discharged the day after Thanksgiving and I went to a recovery house in Mount Washington in the South Hills. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I thought my parents were going to take me home for like this big Thanksgiving meal. My mom gave me some leftovers and some styrofoam. They dropped me off in a crusty, dusty basement of a Mount Washington house with dudes cutting up protein powder on a ping pong table. Looked like some shit you'd see right out of a drug dealing thing. And there were guys on the third floor shooting dope and pissing into jugs. But my deal was like, wherever I focus is where my recovery is going to be. I didn't know that at the time. I just didn't have any other options, right? So we went to a meeting. It was called Friday Night Lights on Mount Washington, right on Grandview. And Saturday, the speaker meeting at Mount Washington. And then Sunday, I went to Recovery Sunday. Phil was talking about it, the Brookline meeting. There's if anybody's been there, most people probably have, all of these steps that walk down and lead down to it, right? And my first time there, my man Frank took me, and I felt like everybody was looking at me because I showed up at the recovery, not in a good way. I showed up at the recovery house with a trash bag full of shit that my dope dealer didn't want. I didn't have anything. And I came from making six figures, and I've always had a good job. I've always been, because my daddy set me up, to be quite honest, to be successful, and he paved the way for me. I was able to have good jobs, right? I'm a fairly intelligent person. I can talk a good game like most of us can. I can fake it until I make it, and then I can fake it a little bit longer. So when I come into there, like I was just telling a buddy in Philly who's struggling to stay clean, we were walking around the King of Prussia Mall, and I told him about this time where I showed up to see my dope dealer in Johnstown, and he had everything. All of the clothes he had on were clothes that I traded him for drugs, and that was like, for me, it took something material to understand, like, the fuck are you doing with your life? And I used well after that. It didn't matter. But that was like one of those seeds that was planted. And I was that guy who would walk into meetings for about 3 years with a basic text under one arm and a spoon in my pocket. And, there's something to be said for keep coming back, right? But my path, like going to that place in Mount Washington and being forced to go to meetings and walking down those steps felt like all these eyes of judgment were on me. But the longer I stayed clean, I got into that room, and about 3 weeks in, I started seeing these guys carrying these green and gold books and going into the back room. And just like when I was getting high, I want to know what's going on in the back room, right? I want to know what the secret society is around here. It turns out they duped me on this one, right? So we go downstairs into the gymnasium, and it's Works How and Why meeting, and I'm in the middle of 6, 7, and 8. We're on the 6th tradition at this point. Probably one of the driest things for somebody with 30 days clean, right? It's not what I was interested in hearing, but I stuck around because I'm afraid to, I don't want to be seen. I want to just kind of wither into the shadows. So I didn't want to get up and leave. There's all the cool people outside vaping and talking, and sometimes they have a speaker meeting or whatever. But what I come to find out is all the old heads with decades clean were downstairs talking about the shit you didn't really want to hear about with 30 days clean. And some of it didn't matter at that point, right? My journey at that point was just don't take anything, go to a meeting, and try to do better, So, but the second step is where Narcotics Anonymous hit home for me, right? And the reason being, I heard some shit like the first step is the only one you have to do right. Now, like Gordon was saying, I related to him, I worked the first step like a homework assignment. I would there's a fucking shitload of questions in that thing, but I would rewrite my answers in the form of that question, and I worked my step with a sponsor that at the time he fit my need, right? It was somebody with 30 days clean, had everything I wanted with a 30 days clean brain, right? It was like he spoke well from the podium. He had a nice car. He always had girls around him. He had, 7 or 8 years clean at that point. All of those things were great, and that's what I needed at that time. I understand that just like my disease is progressive, my recovery is progressive too, right? I wouldn't have been able to handle somebody like Hank with 30 days clean because he's going to tell you like it is, and he did later on in my recovery. But I needed somebody who would kind of spoon feed me, and I started working steps. But I worked one like a homework assignment, but to understand the insanity that I'm trying to be restored from, I have to look back at my first step and things like standing in front of my sister's picture window with a landscape brick. And I had this moment, this frontal lobe moment where I'm like, are you really going to do this? And then the disease kicks in. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm going to do this. So I throw it through the window and I go get what I get. I stole checks from her. Like, I wasn't some gangster, dope boy, drug dealer, nothing like that. I terrorized the people closest to me that I knew wouldn't turn me into the cops or pull up charges, or I wouldn't get caught, right? I always got caught, but they wouldn't say anything. See, my family is like, we don't talk about things, right? We don't address the elephant in the room. We just ignore it and hope it gets better. Until like probably 4 treatment centers in, my sister, who's a nurse, had to explain to my mom, like, he has a box of 100 sharps in his car that I have to continuously throw away. He's injecting heroin into his arm, you know. So talking about the title of this, you know, one ultimate authority and a power greater than, I think of that kind of in reverse, right? So a power greater than me is what got me to Narcotics Anonymous. The things that, like in 1997, when I started going to Kensington and Philadelphia, me and 3 other white kids in a Ford Tempo with our hoods up and a knife in our pocket, copping dope, like what the, like literally taking a knife to a gunfight, right? If they didn't see me as a profit center, that car would have been burned up and we would have been gone, right? But the reality is that's God walking me through this. Every time I'd get out of treatment or every time I'd push down the plunger, not knowing if what I had in there was a hot shot, that's God walking me through this. This is a power greater than myself, getting me to where I am today. And then I have the audacity to come into recovery and say, I don't believe in God, right? It's crazy. And I understand, like, I've worked the second step with a couple different people and a couple, what I would consider like the Fab Five of recovering addicts, right? Like George put me through it, Danny L put me through it, Robin B put me through it, a bunch of different guys put me through the second step, and each time it means something deeper to me, right? Because I understand, like, what I thought I knew about God when I got in here is just blown out of the water, right? There was even one time in my recovery where I said I was atheist, and probably because I don't know what that meant, and I didn't know what I believed in, right? And the reality is, me and a couple guys were outside talking about this earlier. If you asked me to draw a picture of what my God is today, I couldn't draw like a man or a person or a figure. It would be an energy that we have. And sometimes it's what happens in these rooms, right? The times I feel closest to God's presence, where I can feel God's presence the easiest, is in nature for me, where I can sit still. There was a moment this summer where I was able to take my family out to California, and I was sitting in this one particular spot and looking over this beautiful, beautiful sight, and at the same time, I felt both insignificant and powerful in the same moment. And, you know, we were talking about this outside, like when you zoom out from a worldly level, I feel very insignificant, and that's okay. There's some humility in that. But then when you zoom in, and I would like zoom in on my family unit and my wife and my stepson and my son, I'm very powerful in that, right? And that's where I need to focus. I need to focus locally. I need to focus internally, not externally. So then I get clean. There's been some traumatic shit that's happened in my life, and I believe that trauma is the gateway drug, not marijuana or whatever. You know, at 5, and I was in 5th grade, so I was probably 12. I was in a bus accident where a kid was killed, and I was in the back seat of the bus and saw all of that, and never was able to like go through therapy or anything because we don't talk about it. When I was 15, my best friend, I was in the back seat of my friend's car. We were driving home on a Friday from school, and we got into an accident. We hit a bus, so there's 2 bus accidents. And I watched my best friend that I grew up with take his last breath at the age of 15. And then about a decade later, in 2006, I was married in Houston, Texas, and my wife, who was Australian, had a drinking problem, and we had physically separated, and she died in a car accident. And she was drunk. Thankfully, nobody else was killed, but I not only had to like wait a couple hours to call her parents, but I then had to ask them to bring her dental records too, because that's how she had to be identified. And if I would just take a step back and look at those situations and understand it could have been me in that front seat that died when I was 15. I could have been with her. You know, God is walking me through not only the process of like keeping me out of that front seat, but the days after her funeral, to understand she was dating somebody else. I was sleeping with a local bartender and doing all that stupid shit that we do to try to externally feel better about ourselves. I was able to make healthy decisions for her and her family that were not out of ego for me. And that wasn't me speaking. Like, I wanted to punch the shit out of her boyfriend when he asked to be an honorary pallbearer. My dad, who's a big dude, is like, no, just let it go. You know, but I'm human, right? But when I come into recovery and I talk about like how I don't believe in God, that's a spit in the face of my higher power. Now, my God, like what I depicted of, and I grew up Catholic too, and I made the joke one time in probably the wrong room that I grew up Catholic, so I'm not religious anymore. But the reality is it just changed a lot, right? I grew up in like a shameful, guilt-ridden church that is not what I believe in, right? That's not appealing to me in any way. And thankfully, when I get into Narcotics Anonymous, they don't tell me it has to be anything other than loving, powerful, and greater than myself. And there's a lot of that, you know. So the process of like getting clean and you know, I'm as clean as I've ever been at 90 days clean, but my head is still just a mess, right? So I just keep rolling, and you know, that one ultimate authority I got, like, I work in oil and gas, right? And we make good money out there. We make some sacrifices. We hit the road. My first job, they sent me to Detroit. I'm talking to George at this point, and I'm like, he's like, how many meetings you getting to? I make it to my home group back in Pittsburgh on Sundays. And he's like, motherfucker, get to a meeting. And I'm a white boy in Detroit driving a work truck, right? He's like, show up to a meeting. I guarantee you get more love than you do in the South Hills. And he was right. I showed up. Every person hugged me. They're like, "Where are you from?" You know, we had lots of talk. Before, after the meeting, they're inviting me out for food. All of those things. Like, and that's what I think sometimes we lose track of, is like inviting the person you've never seen before. That's truly what I believe anonymity is. It's not that you said you heard Scott Newcomer or this or that. It's the fact that you give the person who walks through that door the same opportunity as anybody else. You want to talk about like a power greater than me. You know, my anonymity is mine, and I can break it if I want to. My last name is Newcomer, and nobody believes that. Everybody's like, what's your last name? But that's a preconceived situation where I was meant to be in Narcotics Anonymous, right? And that's a humility shot, saying like, you might have a little bit of time clean, but you know, you can be a newcomer at any given time, right? But what I understand going through now, and what I look at, you know, the one ultimate authority, I start to get some money in my pocket, right? I'm working. I bought a truck. I do all these things. I'm not shopping at Burlington anymore. I'm going to the outlets in Washington, stepping it up a little bit. You know, here comes my ego, right? My ego's way outrunning my step work, and the judge sentences me to 9 months house arrest. I make some real bad decisions on that. I was still living in that recovery house. It was Cambria County judge. I was like, hey, can I do this in Allegheny County? She's like, yeah, I don't care where you do it, but you got 9 months house arrest. So me, two guys out of the recovery house, decide we're going to move to Arlington. That's a great idea, right? So thankfully, I made some friends in recovery, and a guy that I haven't seen in a while, but Bobby E., had some connections with some people in Arlington, and he kept me safe for about 3 months until that situation came to fruition and those guys started using, and I had to tell the guy, I was like, hey, I got to break this lease. I'm leaving. And he's like, well, you know, I'll take you to small claims court. I was like, you can do whatever you have to do, but I'm out, you know. And so I moved around. I did some other things, but, you know, so I see Hank and George and a bunch of guys, Matt and a bunch of them later, a couple months later, at a retreat or something. And Hank's like, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, it's all right, you know, blah, blah, blah. He's like, do you get your own place? I said, no, I'm living with so-and-so. He's like, why not? I said, I can't afford it. And he looks at me, he's like, you got $350 shoes on, you got $300 pair of jeans, your watch is $500. He's like, motherfucker, you can afford it. You just chose not to. And it was about 2 months later, I called him and I was like, you're right. I made a bad decision, but I kept my clean date. And he's like, I'm proud of you, man. Call me if you need anything. He was my guy at 4 o'clock in the morning when something would hit. I'd know he was driving somewhere and I could call him. Those guys made me feel at home in Narcotics Anonymous. And it's not what I would think, being a white kid from the sticks. These are Black City guys that made me feel loved and a part of. So we have to be careful. Like, we don't get to choose who saves our life, right? And that one ultimate authority that I have now not only governs like what I do, but it's heavily rooted in service. And that's where I found a purpose, right? And service to me begins at a home group. And I had a home group that was on Friday nights in Indiana, and it's a speaker meeting, and I had a lot going on in my life. I had some things going on in my relationship. There was a legal situation with my stepson. I had a lot of things going on, and I wasn't talking about it. I was getting to 1, maybe 2 meetings a week, usually 1. It was a speaker meeting, and I was like, man, I got to change. So I went to this Tuesday night meeting, or Monday night meeting in Indiana, and it's a step 2 meeting if you ever want to come out. But it definitely, so I started to serve at a home group level. After the pandemic, we found we have a very healthy area. I'll say that. We have a lot of people involved in service, and that can be both a blessing and a curse sometimes. But what I can say is, like, coming out of the pandemic, we had a very strong H&I committee, and we felt that like it was a 2-pronged attack with H&I and PR, right? One is like, make sure we get back into these facilities and get the message to the people who need it. And the second part of that is let the public know we haven't gone anywhere and you need Narcotics Anonymous now more than ever, right? So we did that, and I found my purpose through service. And these guys like Lance and Rich and those guys always used to tell me, like, stay in the middle so you don't fall off the edge, right? So I feel like this one ultimate authority is heavily rooted in service for me. It's the group conscience, right? And I brought that into my home. My wife is also in recovery. And we understand that, like, we bring love and we bring the group conscience in. Like, what is best for the collective of our house? And I don't always agree with that shit. My wife is 11 years younger than me. I'm 45. Like, I was taught, I parent different than she parents. And we have to understand that, like, she opens my eyes to what's better for our child than what my sometimes archaic ways of thinking are, But I love that shit. Like, I have a son in this process, and that's really, like, that was a life-changing event for me. Holding my son for the first time. Like I said, I have a stepson who's 11. That's a different role for me. His dad is in his life, and I want his dad to be in his life. But what I have with my son is my mission in life changed at that point, right? I felt a calling to be a better man for myself and for him, and to be a better example for him and my stepson. It's an honor and a privilege, always to serve Narcotics Anonymous. This is my least favorite way to serve, just because I still get nervous, man. This thing is in my heart. And one of those guys, I'm pretty sure it was George, that always talked to me about how, I got a disease in my brain that screams lies at me, and I got a heart that whispers the truth, and you got to put some work in to quiet that brain down, right? And I'm an addict. My name is Scott. I'm gonna keep coming back.